video 5 and 6, we're going to focus on the overdrive and reverse piston, the input clutch, several of the pistons, and of course snap rings and seals.
Now here we have the 42 RLE input drum. You've seen this part whenever we pulled it out of the very front of the case in the beginning of the overhaul. We lift it up here, as you can see, there's a long shaft. This is the input shaft, it goes into the torque converter. Now, you gotta have a place to kind of put these things to handle it. Most people don't have a hole in a table, like most shops, or we do. So you can substitute something like a milk crate. In this case, it fits quite nicely. It'll be easier to handle. So now we'll start the disassembly of this input drum. It's very important that when you take these apart, you make sure everything goes in a neat order so you can put it all back together properly, or it may not function correctly. This plate and snap ring here is a reverse input clutch pack. We're going to remove this snap ring. Take you a screwdriver, and whichever end you can get. Give it a little force, not too much. Go all the way around. Grab the end of the snap ring. Hold it while you're prying around. Will come out. We're going to lift the reverse reaction plate out of the drum. These are a little stiff when they're in there. So what you want to do, take a couple screwdrivers, pry on each side a little bit, doesn't take a lot of effort. Work your way out. Try to be as even as you can so you don't get it caught. Pick the blade up and we'll set it down. Next, you can see some friction material that went between this plate. You can see this steel plate here has tabs on it which lock into this plate, lock into this drum, so they don't move when this particular clutch applies. You're going to lift it out, set it on top of your friction material we pulled out. And you can see another friction. These are not locked into the drum, these are splined onto a hub and will lock against the hub when the clutch is applied, and the steels will lock against the drum when the clutch is applied. Set that out of the way. And you see here we got another little thrust washer. Pull those off in order. And this one's in good shape. It's a low mileage tranny. Nothing wrong with it. We can reuse it. This washer here is what they call a selective thrust washer. Now, it looks good to here. Doesn't seem to have any damage. We will reuse this particular washer. So we'll set her out of the way. As you can see here, we have a clutch hub won't come out. That's because at the end of this hub has little notches in it that retain the clutches underneath this plate from falling off the back of this hub and interfering with the clutches behind it. There is a snap ring on the outer edge of this drum here that we have to remove next. If you're lucky, you'll have an edge sticking out already. And you can usually grab it. This one's a pretty easy snap ring. Not too bad. We're going to take that and lay it in our stack up. Next is the overdrive pressure plate. This is kind of a multi-function deal. This pressure plate here will be used for the OD clutches to press on and the reverse clutches to press on. It makes this drum really compact and it can do a lot of things. We're going to pull this out. Flip it over, and you can see down here we got some more clutches. And always remember how the stack up started. If it had a steel first, you want to keep that in order. This has a clutch. We'll flip that over, keep it in order for later reference. You can see some steels down here. At this point, we can grab this clutch hub and just yank it all out. And remember the tabs I talked about earlier on the bottom of this drum, they'll catch these. And they'll keep this from wanting to ride into this next plate. You can see how this drum is, or this clutch hub is set up, and how them keep them frictions from falling out, interfering with this next pressure plate down in here. And we also have a thrust washer. Remember where that goes. And we'll set all this aside. As you see, we have our little stack up in this drum thus far. This will be the top of the drum. We've just taken it out, flipped it right over. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff there already. So what I like to do is take all my plates and snap rings, stack them up, and even with this particular unit, they're pretty confusing. So I'll take my snap rings and just lay them underneath my plates. If I were to take this snap ring and say lay it out like that and have a bunch of other snap rings on top of it, I might get confused, and it can happen. And I have done it before. So that will help aid in reinstallation. Our next snap ring, and these transmissions are the king of snap rings, is this little guy right here. It doesn't really lock into anything. It is actually a wavy snap ring. And we'll explain that in a second. We're just going to push it. It'll come right out. No big deal. Kind of turn a little bit. It'll work its way out. If you hold it up, you notice it's wavy. What this does is act as a shock absorber. When this particular clutch applies, this drum moves two different sections of itself to apply that clutch. So this will, one end of the drum will push against this snap ring for shock support, basically. Almost like an accumulator does in the transmission too. If this wasn't here, it could have a decently harsh shift, or you would notice a different shift feel. Here we have our input drum again. You'll notice another clutch hub. See, this clutch hub is splined into these clutches down here. This is the underdrive clutch in this particular transmission. Notice when I spin it, it's taking them frictions along with it. And you have steels, just like we had on top. Whenever this clutch applies, it will lock, and we will achieve a gear ratio. This particular hub, we can lift right out. Doesn't have any tabs on the bottom to catch them. So just remember what order it came in. There's no bushings on either side because they're on the other hubs. I like to stick that down there. Next, imagine that we have another snap ring for the underdrive pressure plate. We'll find the end. It's tucked in here. This one can be a little tricky. And we're lucky, fortunately, and we have a tab we can grab it with. So we'll get it started. Work it out. Work your way around the drum. I can grab it with my hand now, probably. These will flex pretty good. Don't worry too much about breaking them. They're pretty resilient. Sometimes they break though. And we have the snap ring out of its case. I'm going to set that snap ring like that. And here's your underdrive clutch assembly. As you see, these frictions were engaged with that clutch hub in there to drive it whenever it was appropriate. We're going to pull the underdrive pressure plate out. Now notice, it's stepped. This is where making sure you stack things up correctly is critical, because if we flip this upside down, we'll have major problems. One little thing can cause big problems in transmissions, unfortunately. We're going to flip this over, and we see more frictions. Now you'll see this underdrive friction here. I'll pull it out. Nothing wrong with it. It's a little varnished. That's not bad for 91,000 miles though. All the other clutches in here are pretty good. No slippage. That wasn't our problem. Our snap ring blowout in the case was. Now you see, I've taken that friction out of that underdrive, but we will not be able to lift the rest of the stack out of there because, imagine that, there's another snap ring in here. We will have to take that one out to get the rest of the stack. And we're lucky again to have place to pry on. And always keep each snap ring that came out of between each pressure plate in with its pressure plate, because these snap rings can be select fit too, and if you mismatch them you could have incorrect clutch clearances, and these are very picky about that. So we'll work this snap ring out of here. We got it. We can pull the rest of the stack out of there, and this is the underdrive clutch. We have steel, friction, steel, friction, steel, friction, steel. We're going to lay that aside, and all these are good. No slippage, no problems. This is all of the clutches in this drum. So now we're going to have to disassemble the hydraulic part of this drum and what makes these clutch packs apply. There's quite a few seals. There's a big spring. We're going to take this back to our press, and we're going to remove this piston. We will press this down with our press, remove the snap ring, pull this piston up. Now for this next part, we got to apply a lot of pressure. There's a big spring underneath this piston, and we have to push it down to remove this snap ring. It's under a lot of force. We've chose to use a ball joint tool from your typical ball joint set you use to do ball joints, things like that. This makes a perfect tool in our case. Set it up there on this piston. Try to get it as straight as you can. As straight as we can with the press. You see the piston sliding down away from the snap ring. It's down enough now. Take our big snap ring pliers. Get in the ring. Ring comes out. Set that aside. And you see this ball joint tool is cut out. And this makes it really ideal for this situation. We can press down and we can get snap ring pliers in there to remove this. Let the jack out. Piston will simply come out along with the spring underneath. Tool off, lift up on this piston. This is another bonded rubber piston. We've seen this in the back of the case. Check it. In order to service this, if it was tore, you have to replace the whole piston. Not like an old aluminum piston with a changeable lip seal. In our case, this one's fine. The rubber's still soft and pliable. Good to go. Set that aside. Now here's this big old spring that was underneath this. This is why you need a press in this situation. So we're done with our press now. We're back here at the milk crate with our input drum. Set it back down in our hole. You see here, we got one of those flat needle thrust bearings. Sticks down in there. It's just simply pries out. Little tabs on here. Make sure you remember how it came out, because it's going to go back down in here. It will take a little bit of force, a light tap, to get it seated back in there. Take it out. Stick this in the middle of this piston and big spring we pulled out for reference. Next is the piston housing for which this piston came out of, with the big spring behind it. It's going to lift right out of there. It's just a stamped steel housing. This piston serves two functions. For the big piston we removed with the spring, we'll demonstrate that. Piston will compress that spring and fit down in there. That's its first function. Come out, apply its designated clutch. but also the back of this stamped casing or stamped steel housing goes down in this input drum and acts as another piston. See, there's a seal down in the corner. So it's a dual function piston. Now you can see why we had to use the press, because it's a very heavy loaded spring. Next, we have another snap ring. Way down in there. This holds another piston in this drum. Now we're getting close to the bottom of this input drum. And as you can see, there's another snap ring, which retains another piston. This is a drum within a drum within a drum. And for those of you that has never been in an A604 42RLE, you're probably starting to figure out by now that there's a ton of snap rings and aluminum drums. We've got to remove this snap ring now. It's a little challenging to get out, but it will come out. Now this piston is quite large. It takes a little effort to get out. But as you can see, piston within a piston within a piston. Very complicated. Now we're at the very bottom of this input drum with one more piston left, believe it or not. And that is this entire outer section. It will just pop right out. And as you can see, it's another piston. Down in turbine input is actually its casing where that piston rides in. See a little seal there. We have a few seals here, which we'll get to. This is that Bellevue spring that put a little pressure on that snap ring we got out that retained the other piston in there, as you've seen earlier. And you do not have to take this snap ring out. There is no seal there. It's a Bellevue spring for which this piston returns with. Now that we're done disassembling our input drum, we're going to remove the shaft, which is the input shaft, rides in the torque converter. Little clip, ringed clip in there we have to remove. It can be fussy. You can. Don't want it to fit loose upon reinstallation. So we're back at the press now, and this shaft's a little tight. We're going to have to press it out. We're going to reach down and catch it when the time comes so it doesn't fall through and damage the front of the shaft. It's only tight on the portion of it up top. We've caught our shaft, and we have 3 scarf cut sealing rings. They're cut at an angle. So we're done with our input drum disassembly. Pressed this shaft out. Got these 3 seals here. Shaft looks good. Look like it's been beat up any. So now we got to start the process of putting it all back together.